All the people with the backwards attitude, pointing fingers, and that's a bad excuse for sitting on your ass when you complain. Stupid things that you don't want to change. You ain't got no time for me, and I ain't got no sympathy for you.
Guys, I have a question for you, and because I came across this video that's playing just earlier this week, Hat Tip to Flat Earth Map, Flat Earth Model, and because I am the one that's kind of spatially impaired in this group, and you guys are much better at this than me, this gentleman asked a question which I found very interesting, to say the least, and he's saying, how can you see a full moon directly above your head on a globe? And then he proceeds to show the diagram, and of course we know that full moon is usually achieved around midnight, something like that. And so obviously we've seen it many, many times, but here's the depiction. It's showing the sun, and then the daylight side of the Earth is on the other side. So here's the guy standing looking straight up at the moon, and the moon is totally lit, and yet, of course, the Earth is 4 times larger than the moon. So I have to echo this question. How is it possible, or what is the explanation? Now I have to tell you, I Googled it, and it seems like the answer to this is extremely evasive, and they don't really answer it. So do you guys have any insight as to what the excuse might be for why we can see the full moon directly above our head without it being an eclipse?
Well, I would say that's sort of half the problem. The problem is seeing the full moon overhead during the day, because you should be clear on the day side of the Earth when the full moon should be 180 degrees opposite the sun from the Earth, right? And I've actually put this in a couple of videos, and the answer is there is no excuse. There's no possible set of circumstances, and this is just basic geometry talking here, that you should be able to see either the full moon during the day, or on the other side, you know, the crescent moons during the night. And we can see this crap all the time, you know, all the time. I think the last one I documented was a full moon on in August of 2017, and a crescent moon a couple months before that. But it's just so common that we see these observations of the moon that are physically, geometrically impossible on a globe Earth. And it really is a big, big proof. But again, I would just add that, yeah, the full moon during the day and the crescent moons at night are physically impossible on a globe.
Yeah. And a few other people echoed that sentiment in his comments, you know, about during the day. But I mean, just looking at it at night, even, you know, with the daylight side of the Earth facing the sun, and here we are on the backside, and like I said, the Earth's 4 times bigger. How is it not an eclipse? And yes, I know that there's obviously an angle differential, but I don't think that angle differential is enough to...
Well, the distance is the deal. The distance is, I mean, the moon is 30 Earths away from the Earth, so when you model that out and you actually draw a moon that's that far away from the Earth, which is absurd to start with. I mean, the way that we see it in the sky, it's not that far. But I'm just saying their model, of course, you put that moon way out there and then just a little bit up or down, and it would get a full backing of sun. Now, are they saying that they see a full moon directly overhead?
Yeah.
See, because where I live, I don't get that. I don't think you would either, Bob, would you?
Well, I think you'd have to be in between the tropics to do that, right?
Or, well, with the 5 degree orbital incline in the orbit, I do think it would go up higher and lower. I'd have to check into that. I don't want to.
Yeah, it would go like 20,000 miles above or below the cross section of the Earth on the ecliptic, assuming that it's at its max divergence in its orbit. So 5 degrees extended over 250,000 miles would position the moon far north or south of the Earth on the ecliptic, but that still doesn't get it. Now, in terms of the question that you asked, Bob, in terms of the eclipses, yeah, I've thought about that a lot. We should have eclipses pretty much every full moon, or not every full moon, but it would be very, very common because, you know, like you said, the moon diverges allegedly from the ecliptic on its orbital path by just 5 degrees. That's the max. So it's not always going to be that far north or south of the ecliptic during a full moon. It's most of the time going to be somewhere in between, you know, just speaking law of averages. But the excuse for that is the whole umbra penumbra phenomenon, where they claim that the sun's rays sort of converge and diverge at some point in space between the sun and the earth, and then you get these really kind of strange, peculiar pinpoint stylus shadows coming from the celestial bodies. But really, you can't demonstrate that behavior of light and shadow in reality. So it is just another, as far as I can say it, a nail in the coffin for the globe, because you just have these physical problems, geometric impossibilities with the globe model, just with simple observations of the moon. But yeah, that answers that question in terms of, why don't we have eclipses, lunar eclipses very, very frequently, and they claim it is because of the umbra penumbra pinpointer shadow of the Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's so much wrong with the moon that if we just spend a lot of time on that. I found that one of the weird things is if you watch the moon night to night, so say tonight you watch where the moon is and then go out the next night and look where the moon is, then it'll be drastically lower in the sky or higher. Well, the problem with that is it's still in the same orbit. It doesn't, according to the heliocentric model, it takes a month to go around. So in the time that we supposedly spun around, somehow the moon has changed its place in the sky by quite a bit. Now, the way that they describe that is because of this orbital incline. But really, it doesn't match at all our observations, being that we see it rise and set, and then to just go out at the same time at night and look at the moon, you're going to see some drastic differences.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay. Well, excellent, because, like I said, I'm a little weak at that, but I mean, even in my limited way, I'm looking at that going, gee, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I think that, Flat Earth Map, Flat Earth Model has a point there. And of course, I'm sure there's some contorted explanation that the ballers.
Well, yeah, there has to be.
Yeah.
It's like people keep thinking that we're going to come up with a debunk that has never been discovered. They have an answer for everything. It's just you need to look at their answer and really see, does it make sense?
We don't know what the sun and moon are. We don't know how large they are. We don't know how far they are. But for all intents and purposes, it appears that what we're seeing as the sun and the moon are subjective instances that are decoded by our eyes and our minds. More or less, it appears that we're looking at projections. And these projections are given from some source light for the sun and the moon and the stars, and they are rendered into the visual spectrum by the atmosphere or the atmos plane itself. One of the biggest problems with eclipses in general is the umbra penumbra phenomenon, where you have essentially pinpointer converging conical shadows coming from these spherical objects in space, and unfortunately nowhere in reality can you demonstrate shadows behaving as such. In reality, an object that obstructs a light source will cast a shadow that is divergent from the obstruction. So you'll have a conical shape that gets wider and wider away from the obstruction and away from the light source. In your theoretical absurd version of reality, you have, and you must have, shadows which converge into a point from the obstruction, which is the opposite of what we see in reality. Now, I will also mention that Eratosthenes' ancient Greek experiment that allegedly proved the circumference of the Earth by measuring the shadow angles of two different locations on the same meridian, triangulating on the sun and getting the result. That Eratosthenes experiment relies 100% on the inbound light rays from the sun coming in at nearly perfectly parallel angles to one another. Now, unfortunately, you would like to have your cake and eat it too. You want to have the light rays coming from the sun at more or less perfectly parallel angles to one another, but also having the light rays from the sun coming in at convergent angles in order to create a convergent pinpointer stylus-like shadow, which, for example, for solar eclipses, when the moon allegedly transits the sun, causing solar eclipses, the totality of the moon's shadow is usually around 50 or 60 miles in diameter. However, there have been cases on record where the totality, the moon's shadow, was less than 2 miles in diameter. And this doesn't make any sense in your model, again, because Eratosthenes' experiment, which is still a flagship quote-unquote proof of a spherical Earth, must have the sunlight coming in at parallel lines from the sun, but you also must have the sunlight coming in at a convergent angle to create this umbra-penumbra effect, which again, you cannot demonstrate this in reality. When a shadow is cast from an object obstructing a light source, that shadow is going to be equal to or greater than the cross-section of the object which is obstructing the light source. Nowhere in reality can you demonstrate shadows which converge into a point. Only in your theoretical model do you see this, because you must have that to make it work. But again, this contradicts the entire basis for your theory, which is Eratosthenes' experiment way back in Alexandria and Syene a couple thousand years ago. So again, I know it sounds like I'm beating a bit of a dead horse here, but we don't have to answer your silly questions. The Earth doesn't have curvature, it's not in motion, therefore it's not a spinning sphere. Other than that, maybe we need theoretical people to start looking at answers to some of these things, but first, you need to look for the answers, or others need to look for the answers. We can't do it all. And one thing that we simply refuse to do is fill in blanks or fill in unknown values with just absolute nonsense theory. We want to take a zetetic approach to this, which means to proceed with our inquiry only based on what we can prove. Now, I'll just give you another thing that's wrong with the heliocentric model, which is, this whole thing is absurd because the Earth clearly isn't a ball. But your question was, how is the Earth casting a shadow on the moon? And if it's not the Earth's shadow, then what is it? Well, in your model, the moon should technically travel through the shadow of the Earth far more frequently than the moon would apparently transit the sun, according to an observer on Earth. Now, the reason for this is because the Earth's shadow should technically be at least as wide as the Earth itself. Okay, it should. Frankly, it should diverge. The Earth's shadow should diverge from the Earth, going away from the sun. But instead, what we have is, again, this peculiar pinpointer stylus shadow of the Earth going off into space, creating a little pinpoint in space that the moon must hit dead on balls in order to get a lunar eclipse, right? But if you look at a 100-year stretch, there are roughly equivalent number of lunar and solar eclipses, which is just ridiculous in the heliocentric model, because in order to have a solar eclipse, then the moon must transit the sun, and there's only one point that the moon could do this from. But on the other end of this spectrum, in terms of lunar eclipses, the Earth should be casting a wide divergent conical shadow into space, and the moon should transit this shadow quite frequently. Certainly more frequently than solar eclipses, but again, we see roughly the same number over a 100-year period, and this is just yet another piece of evidence against your model. But again, to answer your question, if the Earth is demonstrably not a sphere, and I challenge you to produce one shred of physical evidence to show that the Earth is a sphere, then there's no point in answering your question. We don't know what causes lunar eclipses. Now, it could be something along the lines of a Faraday effect, could be something along the lines of a Rahu and Ketu, heavenly body that is not within the visible spectrum that transits the moon during lunar eclipses. But again, until the Earth is shown to be spherical, then there's absolutely no point in trying to answer these questions in a flat Earth model, because we frankly need to get the world on board with this scientific inquiry first, and then we'll start answering these questions later. Again, we refuse to just start pulling stuff out of our asses and writing it into textbooks, forcing it down the throats of all generations of toddlers, and then calling it fact. That is not how science is done. How does a solar eclipse happen? Well, it appears that the moon may be transiting the sun, according to observers on Earth, although it may be something else. I believe that there's enough evidence to support the notion that the moon is transiting the sun, according to an observer on Earth. Although other flatties may disagree with me, I think that there is enough evidence to at least say that that's possible. Now, you said that flat earthers claim that the sun and moon are the same size and on the same plane. I don't know any flat earthers who claim that. I think it's safe to say that if the sun and moon are physical objects, then they are of similar size and along a similar plane. However, the relative size of the sun and moon varies. That's how you get total eclipses. That's how you get annular eclipses. So there is a bit of a variable in terms of the angular size of the sun and moon. So your question or your depiction, your caricature of flat earthers' beliefs is false. I mean, that's a running theme with globeheads, is creating straw man caricatures of the flat earth proponents' ideas and then shooting those caricatures down. But again, that's not how science is done. We don't claim that the sun and moon are of the same size. We don't claim that they are on the same planes of orbit, for lack of a better word. But I think it's safe to assume that they are of a similar size and orbiting, for lack of a better word, upon a similar plane to one another. But that doesn't mean anything. I mean, this is all very, very, very far down the line. The first thing that we have to do is measure the Earth, test it for motion, and until you can find evidence for sphericity, curvature, motion, then all of these points are 100% moot. Now, you also said, how does the moon pass in front of the sun without interacting with it? We don't know. It's irrelevant. We don't know what the sun is. We don't know what the moon is. So to say that, how is this possible? How is that possible with the sun and the moon? Is it so bad to say we don't know? Because, again, we're not going to just start making crap up and writing it down in textbooks, forcing it down the throats of all generations of toddlers, and then call it fact. It's not how we do it. The final thing, and I love that you asked this question, during a solar eclipse, how does the shadow of the moon cover such a small area? Well, I would love to hear your answer for that, because I already know what your answer is. You're going to bring up the whole umbra penumbra thing with this convergent pinpointer peculiar shadow angle that causes the moon's shadow to taper down into a point as it reaches the Earth. But that is not how shadows behave in reality. Now, you can take that position, but then again, that wipes out Eratosthenes' experiment that is a flagship cornerstone of the heliocentric theory, and you can't have both. Your very own theory contradicts itself by Eratosthenes' assumption that the Earth is a sphere and that the sun's rays are coming in at parallel lines to one another. That absolutely 100% contradicts the theory behind the umbra penumbra phenomenon, but see, you have to make that up from your position, because in reality we do indeed see a very teeny tiny, usually 50 to 60 mile diameter shadow of the moon during a total solar eclipse. Now, in your model, you've put yourself in checkmate, because you have to have this umbra penumbra phenomenon. Yet, again, it contradicts Eratosthenes' assumptions, which is a cornerstone of your theory. So which is it? Is the sun's rays coming towards the Earth at nearly perfect parallel angles, or are the sun's rays coming towards the Earth at convergent angles to cause this peculiar phenomenon where shadows taper off into a point as they gain distance away from the obstruction, which cannot be demonstrated in reality? Which is it? How is the shadow of the moon covering such a small area during total solar eclipses? Your model doesn't have an answer for that, yet you expect flat earthers to answer this question when we're the first ones to tell you we don't know what the sun and moon are. There's no shame in that whatsoever. First of all, your assumption is that the sun and moon are spherical objects. If I grant that to you for argument's sake, let's say hypothetically the sun and the moon are spherical, how does that relate to the Earth itself? The answer is it doesn't. Only in your mind is there a connection between these heavenly luminaries and the physical plane which we all live on. The Earth is nothing akin to the heavenly luminaries, nothing like the sun or the moon. So even assuming that the sun and the moon are spherical objects in space, that does not make the Earth a spherical object in space, because frankly, sir, the sun and the moon are simply not the Earth. If we can show that the Earth doesn't have curvature, then it couldn't possibly be a sphere. And by definition, if a surface doesn't have any curvature, and of course it's lumpy, you know, you've got mountains and valleys and rivers and all that stuff, but as a whole, the Earth is shown to be a plane because it doesn't have curvature. I don't know where else you would look other than the ground itself for, you know, large curves, especially over standing water. And if you can't find such curvature on the Earth, then it isn't a sphere. So I don't see any problem with disproving the fact or the notion that the Earth is a sphere, because if it isn't spherical, then what is left? You know, it is flat. So for scientism religious zealots to claim that we are for some reason not allowed to prove that the Earth isn't a ball really goes to show that they are not interested in science, because the scientific method entails asking questions and trying to debunk standing theories.
And I'll give you a couple examples of inductive reasoning from the past dealing with astronomy. First of all, the shape and size of the Earth. It's a very common belief, misconception, that everybody thought the world was flat until 500 years ago at the time of Columbus. Well, it turns out people at least 2,500 years ago knew the world was spherical. Think about that. 2,500 years ago, people knew the world was spherical, and they had different arguments for that. One of them is the fact that when you see a lunar eclipse, the shape of the shadow is always a circle, and only a sphere will cast a circle all the time, regardless of the orientation. There had other arguments too, but that's one of the better ones they had.
Hey guys, Paul on the plane here. Just a quick video today, the day after a lunar eclipse on January 31, 2018. A Facebook friend of mine, Ron Hagberg, who resides in Florida, captured both video and photographic evidence last night of the lunar eclipse that, in my opinion, blows the globe model of the Earth out of the water. At least the lie we are fed that a lunar eclipse is caused by the Earth's shadow being visible on the moon. Now, we're all told that the phenomenon of a lunar eclipse happens when the sun, the Earth, and the moon are all lined up, and the Earth's shadow caused by the sun's light is visible on the moon, so the darkened area we see is supposedly the shadow and the quote-unquote curve of the Earth. But what Mr. Hagberg documented last night, as you can see here, is the alleged shadow of the Earth completely upside down from where it should be on the globe model. If the darkening area of the moon is believed to be the Earth's shadow, then why isn't the shadow appearing on the other side, or the bottom of the moon? You can view all of Mr. Hagberg's work on Facebook. He's made it public so all can view it and review it and consider it and share it, etc. The link is in the video's description. He told me this afternoon his video and pictures are going viral, and he's been asked by many if they can share it. He graciously allowed me to share them here with you.
Now, in Ron's video, you can see that the sun was starting to come up, and the moon was starting to go off into the distance, and yet the one thing that stood out most of all is the shadow, and how the shadow was coming from the top of the moon. What we observed here is the total opposite of what was supposed to be happening. You see, if the sun were being blocked by the curvature of the Earth, then the shadow should have been on the lower part of the moon, and the light from the sun, or the lit part of the moon, should have been at the top where the shadow is. It's completely opposite of what we should see according to the heliocentric model and what we've been told.
Now let's take a look at the phony baloney ball Earth, and this is a supposed lunar eclipse with this model. As you can see, the top portion of the moon should be illuminated and the bottom portion should be darkened. Just another image just representing the supposed orbit of the moon around the so-called ball Earth. Now, take a look here. Again, the top portion should be illuminated. The bottom portion darkened. This angle, this perspective, again, the bottom portion should be darkened, the top should be illuminated. Now let's look at this video. Actually, I have two videos that I want to show recorded the same day from two separate locations, two different states. One from New Mexico and another from Illinois. First, let's take a look at the footage right here from just north of Santa Fe, New Mexico, looking towards Los Alamos. For a better perspective, let's take a look here at the map. Again, just for reference, for Santa Fe, so again, just north, so it's the angle you're looking at right here. And as you can see, the upload date was December 10th, 2011. Okay, let's take a look at the actual footage itself. Start from the very start, from the very beginning. Talks about the phenomenon of this eclipse. It's called the Selenian event. Now let's take a look. Go to this part right here. Now take a look at this time lapse of this moon, where both the sun, again, this is the sunrise, the sun and the moon are both above the horizon. Look at the top portion of the moon. It's darkened. Again, going back, put pause here for a second. Going back to this model, the top portion should be illuminated, of course, and the bottom portion darkened, and you're not getting that. You're getting the exact opposite. Okay? Let me play this again so you understand what's taking place here. So this definitely proves this is not caused by the so-called ball Earth. See this? It's clear as day. For all those people saying the lunar eclipse debunks the flat Earth, you're completely wrong. I'm going to let this video play once again. Just look at all this footage and realize the most important aspect of this is during the sunrise. Okay? And there you go. Now, taking a look here, I showed this before with this guy here in Illinois. Okay, take a look at this footage once again. Basically the same exact thing. Like I said, the same exact day. And they get the same exact results.
6:30 in the morning. It's about 18 degrees out here, and we're standing on top of Cahokia Mounds, just east of St. Louis. Behind me is a full moon, which will soon be going into a full lunar eclipse as it sets, kind of a rare experience, while at the same time behind us the sun is already beginning to rise. So this could be a very interesting and beautiful experience. So it's about 6:55, and as you can see, we're getting a little bit brighter out here. You can see the shadow creeping across the moon. It's a little hard to see, I'm sure, in the camera, but from here we can see nice and clearly. It's about a third of the way covered. The moon's starting to turn nice and orange. Over my right shoulder, you can see downtown St. Louis and the nice early morning sun, which is getting very bright. The eastern horizon behind us. Yeah, we can maybe see it's practically day here yet. We still have the full moon out, which is slowly eclipsing, and it's still cold. Okay, so it's now about 7:04 a.m. and over my shoulder you probably cannot see anything, but through the stacks of the refinery back there, we can just barely make out a little bit of the moon left. It's about 2/3 the way covered with Earth shadow, and it's turning a sort of pale orange, pinkish color. But with the bright morning sun coming up, there's not much, not enough contrast to be able to see the moon there. We can still see it just a little bit. What I find very interesting is I was expecting the shadow to come upward across the moon as it would go down and it would pass into shadow, and actually it's going the other way around.
There you go. This is because the indoctrination from the school system, people just blindly accept and believe what the textbooks say. He's just trying to piece it all together, again, trying to rationalize everything so it fits along with what science says, which is an absolute lie. Again, science book, the school books, the Freemasons that put it all together, it's all about duality, the exact opposite of what we're told. Everything is the exact opposite of the actual truth that we're taught in the school system. Nothing but lies.
it's moving farther up, even though the sun's light is actually coming from over there. It's actually coming underneath the Earth. So
No, it's not. The sun is not coming. The sunlight is not coming from underneath the Earth. Give me a break. Again, just trying to rationalize why it's not adding up to the science books.
So if you imagine, the sun is here, the Earth is here, and the moon is back here, and this light was coming under the Earth.
But how can that be? You just showed yourself the sun is above the horizon. So again, he makes absolutely no sense trying to explain this. Sad. It's very sad how people can't get off the lights. Instead of saying, you know what we were taught doesn't add up, doesn't make sense, what's going on here? They can't do it. Because then you're considered crazy. You can't go there. That's exactly what's taking place.
But the moon must be rotating around even though we're turning, so it looks like the moon is going down. It's kind of an optical illusion. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, an illusion.
So the sun is scheduled to set at 7:08. I'm sorry.
The only illusion is what you're taught in the school system. There you go once again. Top portion is darkened, and the bottom portion is illuminated. And with this video clip, again from New Mexico, there's no narration for this video. Can't explain this. Science cannot explain this. Again, let's take a look here at what space.com has to say about this occurring. Space.com's website. Scroll down. See what it says here. This interesting sky watcher should attempt to see the solar eclipse of the moon and the rising sun simultaneously. The little used name for this effect is called selenium, a phenomenon that is celestial geometry says cannot happen. So there you go. They say it cannot happen. Why can it happen? Of course, because we don't live on a ball Earth. Now, taking a look at all these images provided by NASA over the years of the supposed ball Earth. Of course, I've covered this many times. None of this adds up. But 2012 in North America, look at the United States. Look how large it looks, look how big it looks in relation to the other so-called ball Earths. So what I'm getting at is this. For all those that try to debunk the flat Earth, before you even try to debunk the flat Earth, prove your ball Earth. And you can't, because all NASA has ever given us, again, is nothing but fakery. This is the foundation of your belief, and your foundation is crumbling when this is all you can provide. Complete joke, complete insult when you believe this is, this is legitimate or this is real evidence or proof of anything. So once again, before you even start a debate on the flat Earth versus ball Earth, you got to prove your ball Earth. Till then, you have no debate.
I have also had other folks send me photos, like this one, showing me different angles of the shadow, like on the side of the moon here, which also doesn't work in the heliocentric model.
The explanation of a complete darkening of the surface of the moon, lunar eclipse that is because the Earth is said to be directly between the moon and the sun during the time of the eclipse. On January 31st, Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, California, did a complete recording of the lunar eclipse going through all its phases. Then they compressed it into a 60-second time lapse. Rather impressive. But towards the end you'll see that the moon goes over the horizon at an angle. While you're watching the video, for some reason or another, they uploaded it as if you were watching the video straight up, but once it gets over to the horizon, you realize that you were supposed to be watching it like this. Now, let's go ahead and fix the angle and see right about where these shadows are supposed to be falling.
There are also numerous accounts on Facebook of folks experiencing the darkening of the moon with the lunar eclipse last night, with the sun visible above the horizon. Explain that, Globe Earth defenders.
It's a very common belief, misconception, that everybody thought the world was flat until 500 years ago at the time of Columbus. Well, it turns out people at least 2,500 years ago knew the world was spherical. Think about that. 2,500 years ago, people knew the world was spherical, and they had different arguments about. One of them is the fact that when you see a lunar eclipse...
Here we go, y'all. Morning of January 31st. It's getting light out, and to the west, we have the moon in a total lunar eclipse. It's blood red. See that? So how can there be a lunar eclipse? How can the Earth be causing that when the sun is up over here? See that? The sunrise. See how it's light over there? That's the sun. So wait, if the sun lights up over here, how can it be going down and around the Earth to then block the moon? Like, that doesn't even make sense. Come on, people. That just seriously debunks the whole heliocentric model right here. Right here. Moon eclipsed, up above the horizon, to the west.
There are also numerous accounts on Facebook of folks experiencing the darkening of the moon with the lunar eclipse last night, with the sun visible above the horizon.
Pretty much destroying that whole idea that the Earth is directly between the moon and the sun. Obviously, that's not the case.
People gave ear to an upstart astrologer, Copernicus, who strove to show that the Earth revolves, not the heavens, or the firmament, the sun, and the moon. This fool wishes to reverse the entire science of astronomy, but sacred scripture tells us, Joshua 10:13, that Joshua commanded the sun to stand still, and not the earth.
And then you find other people, I'll just mention in passing, Copernicus, with the heliocentric theory, popularization of that.
Just tell our people what heliocentric means.
That means the sun is the center and the planets, including the earth, go around the sun.
Right.
Good point.
We will see some who are so deranged, not only in religion, but who in all things reveal their monstrous nature, that they will say that the sun does not move, and that it is the earth which shifts and turns. When we see such minds, we must indeed confess that the devil possesses them, and that God sets them before us as mirrors, in order to keep us in his fear.